Bharat renounced, renunciation or vanapras, and then he lived, as a sadhu, did his bhajan, and then a deer gave birth to a fawn, but I believe there was a hunter, so the mother ran away and that little fawn was just left there, and so Bharat took care of it. And he became very attached to it. And then the fawn one day ran away, and he ran after it. And I forget what happened, but while he was running after it, he died. Obviously thinking of the fawn. And so, it is said in his next life, he actually took birth as a deer, but he remembered why. So as a deer, he could remember. And then, it's like, okay, I can't mess around. So then he took birth again, and his name was Jada Bharat. And Jada means like dull, numb. So he remembered, 2 lives ago I blew it. I became a deer. And for whatever reason, I was attached to a deer. So this life, I just won't do anything. I'll just be detached. And I'll walk around like I'm crazy and no one will bother me. So I have to say that because we're going to read what he did, which is none of us are going to do it, but there's a principle. So just so you don't scream and go, that's crazy. I can't do that. Are you ready now? Okay. It's a long verse. Degraded men are actually no better than animals. The only difference is that animals have 4 legs and such men have only 2. These 2-legged animalistic men used to call Jada Bharat mad, dull, deaf, and dumb, because that's what he looked like. They mistreated him, and Jada Bharat behaved for them like a madman who was deaf, blind, or dull. He did not protest or try to convince them that he was not so. If others wanted him to do something, he acted according to their desires. And he was just he didn't want to get entangled in material activities. So this is how he decided to live. Whatever food he could acquire by begging or by wages, and whatever came of its own accord, be it a small quantity, palatable, stale or tasteless, he would accept and eat. That's renunciation. Whatever you get. But I think the Buddhists have this, the Buddhist monks. Whatever you get, whatever comes to you, you eat it. And so, sometimes someone would eat meat and they'd say, well, that's what came to me. So it's, not that we would do that. I think that's an overextension of that idea, but the principle is, if you're renounced, whatever comes you get. Or, traditionally in India, if you take the renounced order of life, you would go, for your meals you would beg. You'd go house to house and beg. But you only take a little at each house. You wouldn't over-collect. They'd give you 1 chapati. You need 5 chapatis, you take 1 from 5 houses. That was the system. So you remain renounced. Obviously we're not doing that, but the principle we can accept. He never ate anything for sense gratification because he was already liberated from the bodily conception, which induces one to accept palatable or unpalatable food. He was full in transcendental consciousness of devotional service, and therefore he was unaffected by the dualities arising from the bodily conception. Actually, his body was as strong as a bull's, and his limbs were very muscular. He didn't care for winter or summer, wind or rain, and he never covered his body at any time. It's not like after you read this you go, I'm fired up, I'm fired up. Where's the cold shower? Put ice in the bucket. I want it. That's not the. It's not. When we were young devotees, that's how we would think. Although taking ice baths is good, is healthy, if you're interested. But you understand what I'm saying? We would read these things and it's like, oh, that's what we're supposed to do. And have you ever tried to do something that's a little too austere? What happens?
For a little while, and then it's too.
You do it for a little while and you can't maintain it. Or, worse, what? You have to make up. So, I'm not eating much for 3 days. 3 days later, I overeat, so that's, at least that's how you know that was too much. So, the Bhagavatam is an ancient scripture within an entirely different context that we live in, but truth is truth. Fire is always going to burn, no matter when and where it shows up. But you have to put everything in context. And when we were young devotees, we didn't know how to do that. So it was just like, yeah. We didn't wear tree bark. Because I don't know, we never had experience. But you know what I'm saying. You could be misrepresented, misunderstood. He was full in the transcendental consciousness of devotional service, and therefore he was unaffected by the dualities arising from the bodily conception. He lay on the ground and never smeared oil on his body or took a bath. Not supposed to copy that. Because his body was dirty, his spiritual effulgence and knowledge were covered, just as the splendor of a valuable gem is covered by dirt. He only wore a dirty loincloth and his sacred thread, which was blackish. Understanding that he was born in a Brahmin family, people would call him a Brahmana Bandhu, and other names. Bandhu. It's like Brahmana Bandhu. Bandhu means friends. So it's just saying you're not really a Brahmin, you're just a Brahmin by name because your parents are Brahmins. Like if your parents are doctors and you're a high school dropout. So, like that. You're the friend of a doctor. Doctor friend. You're the daughter of a doctor, the son of a doctor. Understanding that he was born in a Brahmin family, people would call him a Brahma Bandhu and other names. Being thus insulted and neglected by materialistic people, he wandered here and there. So, anyway, this was his plan. He was doing this purposely. And it's kind of interesting, If you think about it, one time, when Prabhupada was asked, he said, why is it we can't remember our past lives? And he said, well, what if you were a king in your past life and this life you're a dog? Or, or you're just an ordinary person. And you could remember, it would be difficult, right? So he said, Krishna causes you to forget. But Bharat could remember. It seems that he could remember that he was a king. And so obviously as a king, it's an opulent position and there's a lot of prestige there. And what he's doing now, he's this very, very elevated spiritualist, and he wants everybody to think he's crazy. So just leave me alone, I'm crazy. And think about that. That's interesting. In the scripture, it says that when someone is elevated spiritually, they can renounce everything except prestige. Everything else they can renounce. Isn't that interesting? Like give up the world. Wealth, followers, prestige, women, everything. They renounce everything. And if someone says, you're very renounced, then they become proud. That's how subtle and insidious and deep pride is. And here, if you look at what he's doing, he's very elevated and nobody knows it. He just looks like the lowest of the low. And he's not only okay with that, that's what he wants to do. like, we're kind of the opposite. We want everyone to think we're better than we are. That makes us feel good. And he's like very high, and he's like, no, just think I'm crazy. And then he's happy. And that way, he said, this way, no one will bother me. I can just live my spiritual life alone. He wanted to just not be engaged with anybody, and he could just do his spirituality. So, purport. Srila Narottam Das Thakur has sung, Deha smriti nahi yara samsara bandhana kahari thara. One who has no desire to maintain the body, or who is not anxious to keep the body in order, and who is satisfied in any condition, must either be mad or liberated. Actually, Bharat Maharaj, in his birth as Jada Bharat, was completely liberated from material dualities. He was a Paramhamsa, and therefore did not care for bodily comfort. So then you're thinking, okay, why are we reading this? Like, this is like way out of our league. Like, what's like, he didn't care about his body, he doesn't care about eating, he's lying on the ground, doesn't care what people think. So, that's like not how we are. And so, when the scriptures gives these examples, one thing we think is, okay, we talk about a liberated person, well, at least now we can see what one is. Like, what does it look like? Not necessarily, I'm going to do this today, but what does it look like if you're actually liberated? Yeah, you don't care, because you're not actually connected to your body so much. So all the things we care about, like, did you get good rest last night? Did you get enough prasadam? Like, very important, isn't it? Because if you don't, your body's tired, but your mind is probably more upset than your body, isn't it? It's just interesting. I remember, probably all we have this experience. Have you ever eaten and it's just not what you like to eat, and you're just like, doesn't matter how much you eat, you're just not satisfied. You can't, and you're like a little disturbed because you ever had that experience? Yeah. Or if you're tired, all you can think about is going to sleep, right? That's like, you can't think about it. Or if you're really hungry, all you can think about is eating. It's really hard to think about anything else when you get to a certain point. Do you know, I'll tell you a story. Prabhupada, one of his ambitions, or it's a personal ambition, not like an ambition for the world, but one of his personal ambitions, he wanted to be like the Goswamis. The Goswamis were followers of Lord Chaitanya, who came from very aristocratic and wealthy backgrounds, became total renunciates, like complete, like really renounced. Like, I'll tell you a story about one of them. His name is Raghunath Das Goswami, and his father is really, really wealthy. And his father spoiled him, because his father didn't want him to become a renunciate. So he's just like, here's money. We'll find you the most beautiful girl in the universe, and you can marry her, and you can have all this land. And Raghunath, I think a bit like us, our parents would say, take this or that. And you're like, no, I don't want it, I don't need it. So he was like that. So he became a follower of Lord Chaitanya at a certain point, and he went to Vrindavan. Actually went to Puri. And his father was sending him money, and he was living like a renunciate. And at a certain point he said, if I'm going to be a renunciate, I can't take money. I have to live hand to mouth, day to day, because that's renunciation. I don't know how I'm going to eat today, I totally depend on Krishna. That's renunciation. If my father's giving me money, then that's not renunciation. So he stopped taking the money. And then he would beg, because that's part of the renounced order. You depend on Krishna, and so you're not working. That's a practice, so you beg. And it's, it's like very humiliating to beg, right? Can you give me a chapati? It's like, get out of here, you beggar. So they would beg to depend on Krishna, and they would beg as humility. But then even after begging, he thought, this is not good. It's not good for my consciousness thinking, will this person give me something? I like him if he gives me. If this one doesn't, I don't like him. And he said, this is not good. So then, outside the temple in Jagannath Puri, they take prasadam that has gone bad. It's like they cook too much or whatever. And they dump it on the side. And if you go to Jagannath Puri, or if you've been there, you see that's where the cows eat it. This is all right? And that's where he was taking his prasadam. He was so renounced, he said, I'll just eat that. It's like spoiled. He was like, no sense gratification. I want to live as a liberated soul. No sense gratification. And we're sitting there going, oh my God, that's horrible. How could he do that? But for a person on that level who doesn't identify with the body, they could do that. And so, when he wasn't in Puri, Prabhupada said his diet was like a cup of buttermilk. Or cup means like 250 milliliters of buttermilk every other day. That's it. That's what he lived on. And he's like, fine. So, Prabhupada wanted to be like that. He looked at, like we look at that and go, oh my God, that's horrible. And Prabhupada looks at it and goes, yes. And he was sleeping like an hour or two, hour and a half, I think, Raghunath Das Goswami. Like, how do you sleep an hour and a half and live on a cup of buttermilk every other day? How is that possible? And so, when Prabhupada was, at a certain point, Prabhupada was, maybe in 1976, he was finding it sometimes difficult to sleep and difficult to eat. And so one night he was awake, he couldn't sleep, and his secretary was also awake. His secretary was busy. And his secretary told me that Prabhupada had a conversation with him and said, I have insomnia or something, I can't sleep. And he said, my digestion is going. It's really hard to eat. And he said, of course, eating, sleeping, mating, defending, these are termed the four propensities, animal propensities. And Prabhupada said, so defending means you're fighting, or defending your property, or defending your false ego. So Prabhupada said, defending, I'm not doing, and sex, there's no question. And then Prabhupada smiled and said, I guess I'm liberated. Can't sleep, can't eat, can't make, can't defend. And then he said, and Prabhupada told him, he said, I always wanted to be able to transcend these four things. Eating, sleeping, bathing, defending. He said, now Krishna is allowing me to do it. But we, on the bodily level, we hear that and we go, that would be horrible. It's like, have a nice bed, a nice prasadam. It's like, life is good. It's interesting, isn't it? Like it's a complete different concept, which we can't imitate. And when we were young, we would read these verses, and I will give you like a version of, go back to 1972, and I'm 22 years old, and I'm going to give you the heavy class. I would say, Prabhus, we have to reduce our eating. We're all eating too much. We should reduce it. Look at Jada Bharat, it's like, all this, we're just eating way too much. We don't need that much. So for like the next 3 days, the devotees would eat like, yes. So it's a common phenomena that we get inspired to like go up. I get inspired. I'm going to go gym today. I'm going to lift 100 kgs, and you come back, every muscle, your muscles are torn, ligaments, your wrists hurt, like that. So in one sense, it's good that we were like, yes, let's reduce it. And then we'd start sleeping like 5 hours, and everyone in class was asleep, because we weren't sleeping enough. Yeah, it was not impossible that 80% of the class was asleep at one time, if you're only sleeping 5 hours. So we're dealing with this phenomena where it's like, yes, this is good, let's do it, but I actually can't do it. But it's like half of me is like, yes, let's do it. And the other half is like, I can't do it. And so it's like, it's very frustrating, you know. And so after you're like doing that for a while, like for me it was like 20, 30 years, but it was like, hey, maybe you can't do this. I go, really? You think I can't do it? It's like I wanted to do it so much I couldn't give up. I couldn't just recognize that maybe there's somewhere in the middle between, like you should just do that, you know. So that it's a bit frustrating because, you know, it's like I want to be a singer, but I don't know how to sing. You know that you ever have that, you know. I want to be rich, but I don't know how to run a business, you know. I want to be humble, but I really like it when people praise me. You know, it's like we're caught in this middle, we're caught in between two, and it's sometimes very, very difficult to find that middle ground because we feel like, well, I'm just compromising, I'm just giving up on my goals. So when we read things in Bhagavatam like this, it can stimulate that desire for a level of renunciation that's like way beyond what we're capable of. It's not bad to have that desire as long as you know where you're at. Then it's okay. But if you don't know where you're at, then it's like, as they say, you can have your head in the clouds if you have your feet on the ground. But if you have your feet in the clouds, it doesn't work. So it's not a bad desire. And when when you read this, then the natural question will come up, well, what am I supposed to think about all this? You know, he's like, should I not take a bath now? Should I walk around like I'm crazy so no one will talk to me? And that's it's a spiritual practice, like dreadlocks, which are quite fashionable now, but the original idea of dreadlocks was you're not trying to look good. I mean, now people think dreadlocks look good, but back in the day, they didn't look good. So people didn't think it looked good, but that's what the sadhus would do. It's like, you either shave your head or you don't touch your hair, at least for the men. I don't think that was for the women, unless they were practicing some kind of austerity. But that was the idea. I'm not the body, so I'm not going to care about it. And you just put on some cloth, because cloth is it's not in fashion or out of fashion. It's just cloth. Just plain, just put on some cloth. And don't, touch your hair, and then, So, okay, so now what do we do about that? Should you do that also? Tomorrow morning for class, everyone's hair is going to be all messed up, right? You'll be wearing all this, some old holy cloth. So, obviously, we have to get the principle, and obviously it can be motivating. So that would be nice if I didn't care. You know? Do you ever think like that? I wish I didn't care about this, but I do. Yeah, conditioned soul. You've been caring about this for a long time. It's hard not to care about it. You know, it's like, why am I thinking about this? I already told myself I don't like it. So it's not bad to be inspired by this. It's just bad to try to do it if you can't do it steadily. That's where you have the problem. And I think it's natural to lament a little bit. It's like, I wish I could be this way. But, don't give up on it. Just keep working towards it from where you're at. Then it's okay. It's inspiring. Sometimes we become discouraged by it, right? It's like, I can never do that. And that's sad because, these people who started Google, there was a time before Google. Did you realize that? At one point there was no Google. There was no, before BG. I was born, 50 BG. What's BG? Before Google. And then somebody got this idea, and everybody, all his friends are like, "You're nuts. You can't do that." And he's like, "Maybe, whatever. Let's try it." So it was, sometimes the greatest inspiration comes from the most impossible goals, right? Because if it's an ordinary goal, it's not that inspiring, right? Let's make a movie. Venarati gets married. She gets a job. She gets a house. It's not that interesting, but she's got some I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to Jagannath Puri, and I'm going to sneak in the back door of the temple, and I'm going to get this suntan lotion. I'm going to put it all over my body, dye my hair black. Or I'm just going to go to Puri with no money and see how I live. You can't do that. And she's like, I know, but let me think. Maybe someday I'll do it. So it's not bad. It's not bad to say, someday I want to be like this. Maybe someday when I'm 75, I'm going to Puri. I'm just going to put a tent on the beach. That's how I'm going to live. That's my goal. So you can't do it now, but it's just dream. Why not? That's what gives us inspiration. So sometimes we have a goal like that and we say, I could never do that. And then that goal, it's an inspiring goal, but it doesn't inspire us because we just give up on it because I can never do it. So maybe you can never do it, but maybe you can do part of it, and maybe you can't do any of it now, but maybe in the future, who knows what you can do. So, don't give up on your dreams just because you can't realize them 100% today. So when we read this, it's like we have to take inspiration. Well, maybe I could be a little more like this someday. Maybe, someday I won't care so much about what people think about me. Do you care what people think about you? Of course. Did he care about what people think about him? No. Not only did he not care, he wanted people to think he was crazy, which is even further not caring, right? Wouldn't it be nice if you didn't care what people thought about you? That could help. That could be nice. So we can take it like that. Oh, okay, Could be a goal, try to, maybe I could be a little less concerned about what people think about me. That might be nice. So that's how we take this. Now, the other thing also, part of this verse is information. This is when a person realizes they're not the body, this is what it looks like. Because how would you know unless you have an example? What happens when you realize you're not the body? Oh, you could say, you're just satisfied or whatever. But here's an example. You don't care what anybody thinks. You don't care about eating, sleeping. And this is obviously extreme. He's not bathing. We don't follow that example. But if you didn't bathe, would it bother you? Of course. So he's so aloof from the body. Even that doesn't bother him. And his Brahmin thread is so dirty, it's black. Mine's just green from my shirt, from my green shirt.
See?
Everything's green.
Green is your color.
Green is my color. I'll be born in Ireland in my next life. Yeah. So, then Prabhupada makes a point here. He wasn't affected by duality, which is pretty much our position. We're constantly affected by duality. It's a little hot. Can we turn the AC up? It's a little cold. Can we turn the heat up? Right? It's always I'm a little hungry. Is there anything to eat? I'm a little full. I'm tired. Can I take rest? It's and Krishna's saying, really, if you want to be spiritual, you should be a little off the bodily concept. So, the idea of not being affected by duality is being off the bodily concept, and being affected is being on the bodily concept. So I'm upset because I failed. That's, that we'll just say, that's when you're in the bodily concept, that's going to happen. When you're not on the bodily concept, these dualities don't affect you, or they don't affect you much. So that's another point Prabhupada's making, I think is valuable. And it's a valuable meditation because we're so affected by duality. At least it's nice to remember it's not good for our spiritual life to be so affected, because it just means we're identified with the body. You know, sometimes we're hungry, there's nothing to eat. Okay, we just tolerate it. You know? So it's like we wait. Nothing we can do. We're traveling. If you can't, some people have, low hypoglycemia or something. If they don't eat, they're like, they could faint, actually. Right? You have that problem? So, I mean, that's different. I'm saying, but in general, it's at least we can think like this, okay, I mean, it is our philosophy, we're not the body, so, you just might want to practice that sometimes, just saying, might be a good idea, right? Think about it, it is like the basis of spiritual life, that you're not a physical being. So that's why Krishna is saying, be free from duality, because the dualities are just affecting the body and the mind, right? And, here's my little mantra. Yo-yos have a hard time becoming liberated. Yo-yos, up and down. Like yo-yos have a hard time becoming liberated. That's a paraphrase of Krishna's saying that if you're steady, now you're in a position where you're in the ideal position to be liberated when you're not